The sentence, humble building block of all writing. Although, I guess the word is kind of more of the building block. And the punctuation is like the mortar that holds everything together. Conjunctions are kind of like the brick ties that have to be spaced every 4 feet according to the building code. The sentence, a crucial element of writing that doesn't really fit neatly into my bricklaying analogy. How you structure and organize your sentences impacts the enjoyability of your writing. Poorly formulated sentences can be confusing or clunky. Their meaning quickly becomes lost and the reader quickly becomes confused. Not only do you have to worry about the individual sentences, but you have to consider how the sentences all flow together. Too many similarly structured sentences strung sequentially together is going to be boring and repetitive to read. Likewise, sentences of the same length can create a dull, uninteresting rhythm to your writing. Master tying sentences together and you can more effectively control the pacing of the story and get information across to the reader in a way that's both engaging and comprehensible. In order to do that, you need to understand what creates this flow and all the different options you have to achieve it. And in order to do that, you need to understand what goes into making a great sentence. So with that, here are some tips for making sentences that work. Tip number 1, get to the point, which is usually the verb. I made a video a while ago about the most important part of a sentence. I'll put up a card. Spoiler alert, the most important part of a sentence is the verb. That kind of makes that card redundant. Sentences are about actions that happen and the subjects performing the action, and I guess also the object that the action happens to. The verb is where we are getting most of the information about that action, so it's generally wise not to waste any time in getting to it. The most common cause of not getting to the verb is an overly long subject. The cat, whose name is Duncan and who decided for the 3rd week in a row not to attend the shooting of the video, is having a nap in the other room. That sentence has a subject, the cat, and a verb, which is fine. The issue is all the extra information we get between introducing the subject and learning about the verb. It becomes difficult to retain all that information, and by the time we actually get to the verb, we probably forgot who we were talking about anyway. These types of sentences can be hard to understand because you're violating the expectations that the reader has. They're expecting to see the subject and then what the subject is doing, but instead you're giving them a whole bunch of other information about the subject before they get to what the subject is actually doing. This is another reason that the passive voice can become problematic, because passive sentences tend to be a bit longer and because they usually start with the object instead of the subject. You get the double whammy of delaying the verb along with the less pleasant subject-object inversion. Switching from passive to active voice or removing the excess information around the subject or placing it after the verb is usually desirable and a good way to fix these types of sentences. Speaking of desirable changes to sentence structure, tip number 2, vary the structure and length of sentences. The most straightforward way to write a sentence is subject, verb, object. He opened a can of beans. She complained again that they were having beans. The cat meowed incessantly about having to eat beans. Stringing too many of these kinds of sentences together gets tiring. Not only is this kind of a boring way to write a sentence, but if you're using the same pronoun or subject name, it will have absolutely no flow. You can add some variety to your sentence structure by using compound sentences or using different types of sentences. Compound sentences have more than one clause or idea, usually joined by a conjunction like and, but, for, etc., or by a comma. You can also use a semicolon in certain circumstances to create a compound sentence. Other types of sentences can be used here as well. For example, have you heard of interrogative sentences? They are also more commonly just called questions. Also consider your word choice. Instead of reusing the same pronoun or using something like it over and over again, choose different ways to describe the subject of the sentence. Not only will this add some variety to your sentences, but it will give you another opportunity to add some description. Remember that in prose, it's generally okay to begin a sentence with a conjunction, like and or but. This can give you some more opportunities for variety, even though it isn't technically grammatically correct. In fact, you shouldn't be afraid to break some of those rules. Just remember that rules exist for a reason. Tip number 3, know the rules so that you can break them. There's a large book stuffed high on a dusty shelf in a library somewhere that describes every rule you technically need to follow when writing prose. There are also a vast number of amazing books in that same library who break at various points every rule in the aforementioned book. And those rule-breaking books tend to end up a lot less dusty. You will commonly find aberrations like sentence fragments or run-on sentences and sentences that begin with conjunctions peppered throughout many works of fiction. While these sentences do technically break the rules, they also serve a purpose in the story. Fragments create a quicker, more frantic pace to the writing. Run-on sentences can stir confusion or have a more deliberative tone. Even single-word sentences can work to create impact. And in the proper situation, all of this rule-breaking can lead to some excellent writing. However, it's important to remember why these rules exist in the first place. Rules about syntax and sentence structure are there primarily to make writing understandable. After all, writing is a form of communication, and communication is based on understanding the meaning of how you're communicating. Breaking these rules without understanding why they exist is going to cause problems. You need to understand how the rules help the reader understand your writing before you deviate from them. And even at that point, you should only deviate from the rules when necessary, when it adds something to your writing, and make sure that the deviation doesn't affect the comprehensibility of your writing. Even though a sentence is a run-on sentence, it shouldn't be confusing. Sentence fragments should be placed around other sentences that give the reader a clear view into what's going on. Remember that the more of the rules you break, the greater chance you have of confusing your reader. Just like I'm confusing my viewer by jumping right to the conclusion without any transition. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.